Hello everyone, this is Bobbin Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. For today's topic, I'll be talking about the big split between the two kinds of story you can tell, dramatic and comedic. Do you want something lighthearted, fun, and full of silly adventures and whimsy, or do you want to write something serious and down-to-earth that's full of hard choices, traumatic backstories, and characters who make you question who the real villains are? When you create a story in a speculative fiction setting, you have an opportunity to customize the setting's history, cultures, and attitudes to reinforce the kind of story you want to tell. For instance, you could create a dramatic setting where the gods of America are competing with each other for faith and worship. Or you could make a comedic setting where Earth's contribution to the galactic storehouse of knowledge amounts to the words, mostly harmless. But before you get started on the tone of your setting, there's one question you have to ask first. What kind of stories do you want to tell? Speculative fiction, as a genre, is more about the setting than it is about the story. That's why this video series is all about developing new settings. What this means is that even after you decide you want your story to take place in space, in the future, or in a magical realm, you still need to figure out what kind of story you want to tell. And to do that, you need to look at story genres and think about which ones you like. Story genres are all about the formulas you use to build the skeleton of your plot. They include mysteries, romances, buddy cop, team-ups, heists, sports stories, political thrillers, adventures, road trips, and so on. Any of these stories can take place in a speculative fiction setting, and you can tilt them more towards comedy, more towards drama, or take a balanced approach that uses elements of both. Once you know what kind of stories you want to tell using your setting, and you now have a goal in mind, you'll be able to create a setting background that will reinforce the main plot and the main themes. And remember, the background of your setting is just like the background of a play. It's not supposed to be a story. It's supposed to be the context for a story. Consider the real world. Now that you've figured out which direction you want to take your stories and your setting, you should look at the big blueprint that every setting creator can use: the history of the real world. Now, real history tends to be dramatic because historians want people to take history seriously, to empathize with the individuals and groups that shaped history, and to understand why they made their decisions. Even when you look at the history of comedy, of vaudeville, props, and ventriloquism, the accounts of comedy history are dramatic. Now here's the thing. The written history of the world may be dramatic on the whole, but it includes a lot of myths, moments, creatures, and even laws of reality that can be pretty funny, depending on how you look at them. Loki, the Norse god of trickery, once turned into a mare to distract a stallion from working, and he was then stuck as a mare for several months until he gave birth to the divine horse Sleipnir. When the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded by Germans during the Battle of the Bulge in 1945, the German commander asked for their surrender. The American commander's response was a single word: nuts. When the platypus was first discovered and brought to England, naturalists thought it was an obvious hoax because of how ridiculous it looked. The dramatic setting. Like I said, real-world history is fairly serious, or at least it's written seriously. As such, you won't have to change the format much when you're writing the history of your dramatic setting. King so-and-so ruled from year A to year B, war raged from year C to year D, big battle happened at this place on this day, and such person made a revolutionary discovery in year E, and the world would never be the same. Now, with that being said, your focus when building a dramatic setting should be to set up dramatic and serious events that will take place in the present day of your story. That means you should concentrate on the wars that still affect modern politics or are still raging even now, the racism and wealth inequalities that shape current day society, and the personal tragedies that haunt the main characters. Something else you can do is make your fictional setting more miserable than reality ever was. An exaggeration of every slum, every decaying city, every oppressed minority that the world has ever seen. Just make sure you don't go too far. Keep a ray of hope alive, because otherwise your audience will be too depressed to keep going. The comedic setting. To create a comedic setting, you're going to have to put in some extra effort. However, it may not be as much effort as you might think. Remember, you aren't writing stories when you build your setting, you're writing the setups of stories, which means you don't have to write the punchlines. I mean, you can. That's how it works with the Discworld and Hitchhiker's Guide settings, but creating setting jokes requires a very particular sense of humor. Instead of doing that, it's easier and still just as effective to create a setting that offers interesting situations where comedy can flow naturally. If you want an odd couple pairing, maybe robots were recently authorized to act as detectives, and now one of them has become the newest partner of the most technophobic man on the police force. If you want to write a funny adventure, maybe magic powers occur randomly in the population, and the most mild-mannered person in the world has just discovered that he has the most destructive magic power there is. Humor, or at least this kind of humor, is all about subverting expectations, so a good rule of thumb is to create exciting settings with ordinary protagonists, or ordinary settings with exciting protagonists. Another way to emphasize comedy in your setting is to keep the stakes of your conflict low. In other words, avoid putting in any big wars or great injustices or powerful monsters that could destroy the world. Or if you do, then make sure the protagonists, at least, don't treat these dangers seriously. Every story needs at least some conflict if it's going to hold the audience's attention, but if the conflict is too serious, then the humor you add won't be funny anymore. It'll be mean-spirited. The mixed setting. Like I said earlier, real-world history likes to take itself seriously, but it really isn't. Or at least it doesn't have to be. It can all come down to how you present it. Let me give you an example. In 1066, the King of England, Edward the Confessor, died without an heir. The nobles of England gathered soon after, and they declared Harold Godwinson, the most powerful noble among them and the old king's brother-in-law, to be the new king. However, 3 men disputed this decision: Harold's exiled brother Tostig, King Harald Hardrada of Norway, and Duke William of Normandy. Harold crushed both Tostig and Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and he then rushed south to Hastings to defeat the Norman army. William's army wasn't too much bigger than his, and the English ranks were holding, but then Harold took an arrow to the eye, and then he got trampled by a mounted knight, and in a single moment, all that running around and fighting became completely pointless. The difference between drama and comedy is sometimes just a matter of context and presentation. Let me give you a more specific example. A man is walking down the road when he trips into an open storm drain and breaks his neck. That's pretty tragic. A man walking down the road is thinking to himself, I need to kill my wife, but it has to look like an accident. But how can I... And then he falls into an open storm drain and breaks his neck. The events are the same, but the extra context adds humor. Well, humor for some folks anyway. Black comedy isn't for everyone. The idea behind the mixed setting is that real life can be both dramatic and comedic, so why not write a story that's sometimes funny and sometimes serious? You don't have to do anything specific to your setting to support a mixed story, but if you want your setting to support all of the possible tone shifts you intend to add, you should make sure there's a mix of both good and terrible things about the world. The reversal. 3 million years have passed, and only one human is left alive in the entire universe. He wakes up from a cryo-freeze all alone on an ancient mining ship that has been drifting through space for so long it's all but impossible to return to Earth, assuming it's still there to return to. So, let's make it a wacky sci-fi comedy about the last human, a robot, a hologram, and a humanoid evolved cat. In the distant future, technology has become so advanced that it works almost like magic. The hero of our story comes across a strange girl pursued by comically inept villains, and the chase is on. And then the assault rifles come out. People start dying, left and right. And it turns out the strange girl was sexually abused and will be killed by religious zealots in order to keep that magical technology running. A reversal is when you build your setting to be comedic and lighthearted, or dramatic and serious, but then jump the tracks almost immediately and head off in the other direction. Doing this can be a really effective way to slap your audience in the face and make them pay attention. Plus, it gives you a chance to explore interesting ideas like the comedy of a dystopia or the dark implications of a lighthearted kids show. However, you should keep in mind that a reversal is pretty hard to pull off, since you need to reconcile your story with a setting that, at least on the surface, doesn't support it. You should also keep in mind that when you betray audience expectations, a lot of them are going to get turned off and walk away. So make sure the reversal happens fairly early on. Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into Weaving Worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.